Serious prison guard / officers, has there ever been a time where you believed an inmate was truly innocent? What made you believe so? I was a correctional officer for 5 years. The closest I know of someone actually being innocent was the case of the 3 strikes law. Basically, upon being found guilty of a 3rd felony, you're hit with a much stiffer penalty. He was a bouncer at a bar and broke up a fight. Steps outside with the doorman, and there happens to be a news reporter there, reporting about the nightlife, and they ask for an interview. He said no thank you. Cameraman keeps filming, and is asked to stop. He get all high and mighty on his freedom of the press speech and shoves the camera in the bouncer's face, saying that he can't do anything about him filming. Natural reaction. Bouncer palms the camera lens and pushes the cameraman away. Now, he did it with some force, but by no means with any malicious intent. Viewfinder hits the cameraman above the eye and cuts his forehead. He immediately screams, causing the 2 police officers on the other side of the road come running over. One officer ends up recognizing the bouncer from previous charges and arrests him for malicious wounding, a felony. This is the bouncer's 3rd felony and therefore is immediately sent to prison upon being found guilty. Did an extra 10 years for the 3 strikes law. If anyone else had done the same thing, I feel like the responding officers wouldn't have arrested them. 19-year-old kid at my facility was sentenced 10 years for manslaughter and DUI. Kid was 17 at the time of the accident. Swerved to miss a deer, lost control and ended up hitting a tree. Killed his GF who was in the passenger seat. Kid blows a 0-2 on the breathalyzer. Not impaired whatsoever, but he was under the age of 21, legal drinking age, and was still given a DUI which led to the manslaughter charge. I guess this is just more of an example of the fucked up system in place. The girl's family visited him every weekend until he was transferred. Was a guard a few years ago, had an inmate in who was in for a parole violation. Why he received his PV was he was on his way to it, got in a bad car wreck, and broke his collarbone and 2 ribs. Hospital wouldn't let him leave to go to his parole officer. Hospital tried calling to get him out this time, but his parole officer said too bad. If he does not show up today, he will go back to jail. Needless to say 3 days later he walks out the hospital, to be immediately arrested and put in jail. I also encountered 2 other inmates who were exonerated. One guy had been found guilty of rape at a bench trial, even though his DNA did not match the perpetrator's. Let that sink in. A judge found a man guilty of rape, even though it was not his semen in the victim. The other guy was accused of a rape a year after it happened. The victim had made false rape accusations in 2 other states, but the prosecutor either failed to investigate her or ignored this fact. Possibly the worst case I ever saw involved a man whose daughter was molested at a daycare. The perpetrator, the husband of the lady who ran the daycare, had molested several children there. After the trial, the daycare owner claimed that the father of one of the victims had molested her child several years earlier. The cops asked him to come down to the station to talk about it. Having done nothing wrong, he agreed. After talking to him for hours, the police nevertheless believed they had a case against him. He was arrested, could not make bail, and sat in jail for a year. He intended to go to trial, but on the day of the trial the prosecutor offered him a deal. Plead guilty, get time served, go home that day. He agreed, pled guilty, got 4 years. Working in a prison gave me a front row seat to the awfulness of the criminal justice system. Most people in prison really were career criminals and very bad people, but the wrongful convictions were horrifying. I will never agree to talk to the police under any circumstances, and I have no faith in the benevolence of prosecutors or judges. Actually all the time. Remand times are a big concern. Sometimes people can wait in jail for a year waiting for trial and sentencing to be finished, especially if there are witness testimonies to arrange, victim impacts, pre-sentence reports etc. If you've already got a lengthy criminal record, to the extent you'd be denied bail, which is common, it's in your best interest to plead guilty for minor crimes, whether you did it or not. You could sit in jail for a year proving you didn't make that threatening phone call, or you could just plead out and be home in 3 to 6 months, because if you sat there a year you'd likely be sentenced to 6 months time served. Correctional officer here. I work in booking, so I see them when they come in. And when they go out, I also do all of their paperwork and read the criminal complaints the officers file before arraignments. I have seen people get pretty lenient charges, and a few get something more harsh than I would have charged them with, but I have yet to see someone come into my jail that wasn't guilty of something. Examples: we have a 19-year-old female come in a couple times a week on a T47 hold, which is a non-criminal 12-hour sleep off. Yet she is under the drinking age and rarely does the officer ever charge her with a minor consuming, let alone a minor consuming habitual. I have watched her kick numerous officers as well, yet she never gets assault 3 or assault 4 on in Leo. I also have an old man who was 74, and no priors coming on her assault for domestic violence, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. All because he got emotional and pushed his stepson at his wife's funeral, stepson's mother, and then made a scene and refused to leave when the cops showed up to arrest him after the stepson called the cops on him midway through the service. Stepson was a regular in our facility for theft and apparently told the old man that essentially he was happy she passed so that he could get her stuff. He was guilty of the assault, but a little tact and compassion would have gone a long ways to avoid the other charges from taking place. Here. I have never seen someone that I believe to be innocent, but I have seen guys come in that were what I feel to be unfairly imprisoned. We had one guy who was a normal blue collar type who missed a child support payment. Then his lawyer didn't tell him about an upcoming court appointment, and he was given 30 days in jail. The lawyer admitted to not telling him, but the judge wasn't having any of it. Edit. I just thought of another guy. One guy in my institution is in his late 60s and has a sparkling clean record, but is in on manufacturing of a substance charges. His son has had several charges in the same thing before, so we all think that he took the charge to keep his son from doing time. As an ex-officer, it's difficult to believe anyone in prison. The inmates that you don't want to believe that it will usually admit it to you. The inmates that lie all the time will blame it on someone else. Well, Boogie was out with money, and Shans didn't like Boogie. Money killed Boogie, and I took the rap for it. You hear shit like that all day. However, there was one inmate Wood was in for over 20 years with a life sentence that was released after new evidence showed he really didn't do it. He's now writing a book and attempting to sue the state. Been a co for a while now, and while I'm sure there are a few, there is only one that strikes me as likely being innocent. He's an old black guy on my rock. Has claimed for years that he's innocent. My partner and I read his file. Basically contains all the info from his arrest including statements and court docs, along with docs from his incarceration, like security level reviews and tickets, and both think there is at least a good chance he's innocent. He was arrested in the early 60s for allegedly robbing a store and killing a white woman. There were eyewitnesses there stating it was a local man by the name of Perry, changed for obvious reasons. The make and color of the car was also reported. Seems like a pretty easy case. Said car is tracked down being driven by our inmate. Let's call him Miller. They immediately arrest Miller and charge him. Even though this is a different man than eyewitnesses report, though they aren't really that reliable, it's all they had. But this is where it gets weird. Instead of charging him as Miller, they call him Perry and charge him under that name. So his legal name, which even appears on the back of his docket as Miller, but he's on our count boards and computers as Perry. Now this is a very old file, and pages may be missing, so maybe someplace in there's an explanation for this whole thing, but based on the file doc we have, it seems really shady and weird. Like the police figured they had a black guy driving the right car, good enough. He is still trying to file appeals and such, but he's so institutionalized he wouldn't even know what to do if he got out. He also absolutely hates when you call him Perry, always says that's not my name. He's one of the better inmates I've ever had, so long as you call him Miller. Correctional officer here, it doesn't matter if they are guilty or not. My job isn't to punish or pass judgment on the inmate, my job is to keep them safe and keep the public safe. I personally have several inmates I don't think should be in prison, but I wasn't there when they made the mistake to get themselves locked up in the first place. Some of the nicest, most pleasant inmates to deal with are lifers, life sentence inmates, because they have came to grips with their situation and the fact that their actions put them here. Edit. I'll share a story about an inmate that everyone I talked to felt was wrongly incarcerated. I worked with this one inmate, an older black gentleman we'll call Mr. Grass. Allegedly Mr. Grass owned a lawnmower repair shop that was well respected in the community. One day some guys bring in some lawnmowers to sell, and Mr. Grass purchased them for a fair price. What these fine young lads neglected to mention is these lawnmowers were stolen. Mr. Grass is arrested, pleads guilty, and is sentenced to quite a few years. Correctional officer for 4 years. I don't think it's been as blatant as this guy is innocent, but there have been a few where it was very obvious that if the person had received some help, such as for drug or alcohol abuse, he would not have wound up in jail. I think those are just as important because as a society we need to prevent these crimes rather than just react to them.